Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. Okay, let's just dive right into this. I want you to think of your body as a massive, bustling city. Now, every city needs a power plant, right? A constantly running master factory that dictates exactly how fast the lights burn, how quickly the traffic moves, and how much energy every single building is consuming. Well, in your body, that ultimate 24/7 master metabolic factory is the thyroid gland. Today, we're going to unpack exactly how this tiny organ wields such colossal power over your everyday life.
But before we step onto the factory floor, ask yourself a quick question. What hidden internal mechanism is actually regulating your weight, controlling your internal body temperature, whether you're feeling too hot or too cold, and even dictating the very pace of your heartbeat? It's super easy to just credit our brain or our heart for all this stuff, but the truth actually lies in a much more subtle biological control center.
And this physical factory building is a small, distinctively butterfly-shaped gland. It rests right there in the front of your neck, just below the thyroid cartilage, which you probably know as the Adam's apple. It's made up of a right and left lobe connected by a tiny bridge called the isthmus. And despite its modest size, this little butterfly secretes hormones that are literally vital for your survival.
So to truly grasp how this incredible little gland runs your entire life, we are going to take a structured factory tour. First, we'll meet your metabolic engine. Second, we'll look at the manufacturing process. Third, management and logistics. And fourth, the impact of imbalance.
All right, part one, meet your metabolic engine.
What's actually kind of crazy here is the sheer imbalance in the production ratio. You might intuitively assume the body produces equal amounts of its key hormones, but absolutely not here. The thyroid gland churns out predominantly one product, thyroxine, or T4. A massive 93% of the output is T4. Meanwhile, just a tiny slice of the pie, a mere 7%, is triiodothyronine, which we call T3. So you might be wondering, why such a heavily skewed ratio?
Well, the crucial point is understanding the fundamental difference between the two. T4, that one produced in bulk, is essentially a pro-hormone. It's incredibly abundant, sure, but it is biologically inactive. Think of it like a sturdy piece of flat-pack furniture that could shipped out in a box. It has no intrinsic biological activity on its own. T3, on the other hand, is the fully assembled, ready-to-use product, and it is 4 to 5 times more potent than T4. So what happens is that the abundant T4 travels out to your peripheral tissues, like your liver, where it's essentially unpacked. It gets converted by removing just one single iodine atom into that highly potent active T3.
Moving on to part two, the manufacturing process.
Zooming in on the busy factory floor, the follicular cells of the thyroid. This is where the real magic happens. The gland actively pulls raw materials, like amino acids and iodide, straight from the bloodstream. It literally pulls them in against the concentration gradient. These materials pass into the follicular cell, which acts as the main assembly machinery, and are processed near the colloid, which functions as a sort of storage warehouse to build these hormones.
Here is the exact 6-step assembly line. It starts with iodine formation. And hey, this is a really critical takeaway. We absolutely need 120 to 150 micrograms of dietary iodine daily from things like salt or seafood for this very first trapping step to even work. Next, the cell forms a large protein called thyroglobulin. Step 3 is iodination, where the iodine actually attaches to this protein. Then comes condensation, or coupling, where these iodinated pieces join together. Finally, the finished hormones are secreted right into the bloodstream, and any leftover parts are deiodinated and recycled. It is an incredibly efficient, practically zero-waste system.
Now, you'll often hear scientists refer to this overarching process by a very specific name. It's called organification. It simply means taking raw elemental iodine, an inorganic mineral you ate, and biochemically binding it onto that thyroglobulin protein. It's the literal moment where raw earth material is transformed into a usable, life-sustaining organic hormone. Pretty amazing, right?
Okay, part three, management and logistics.
So the thyroid doesn't just produce hormones randomly. It follows a very strict chain of command that actually originates up in the brain. The CEO of this operation is the hypothalamus, which sends an executive memo called TRH down to the middle manager, the anterior pituitary gland. The pituitary then releases TSH, or thyroid-stimulating hormone. TSH is the direct immediate boss of the thyroid gland, telling it to crank up the production of T3 and T4, which then ship out to your target cells.
But how does the body stop the factory from overproducing and, burning the whole city down? It uses a brilliant negative feedback loop. Once high levels of T3 and T4 hit the bloodstream, they travel all the way back up to the brain. They essentially knock on the doors of the pituitary and hypothalamus and say, hey, we have plenty of product down here. This inhibits the release of TRH and TSH, perfectly balancing out your metabolic rate.
Now, how do these newly minted hormones travel safely through the watery environment of your blood? They rely on a shipping department of specialized transport proteins. Almost all thyroid hormones have to bind to these carriers to remain inactive during transit. The main heavy lifter here is thyroxine-binding globulin, which carries about 80% of the load. Transthyretin carries another 10%, and plasma albumin carries the final 10%. Only a tiny fraction of a percent actually travels free and active in the blood.
For the final delivery, the active, unpacked T3 hormone drops off its carrier protein and enters a target cell. Because it's lipophilic, meaning it loves fat, it easily slips right through the cell membrane and heads straight for the nucleus. Once inside, it binds to DNA receptors to initiate protein synthesis. It literally cranks up the metabolic engine, driving the cycling of the sodium-potassium pump, increasing your oxygen consumption, and firing up mitochondrial respiration.
And finally, part 4. The impact of imbalance.
Let's look at the two extremes side by side. With hyperthyroidism, the factory is in massive overdrive. You have sky-high T3 and T4. Because of that negative feedback loop we talked about, your TSH drops to almost zero. The sodium-potassium pump is working so incredibly hard that it generates excess energy. Patients experience rapid weight loss, an accelerated heart rate, and severe heat intolerance. But with hypothyroidism, it's a sluggish factory. Low T3 and T4 cause the brain to just scream for more, resulting in high TSH. The metabolic engine stalls out, leading to weight gain, a slow heart rate, and profound cold intolerance. Zooming in on that overdrive scenario for a second, about 90% of hyperthyroidism cases are actually caused by an autoimmune condition called Graves' disease. The body produces rogue antibodies that mimic TSH, essentially forcing the thyroid to work nonstop and completely ignoring all negative feedback. One of the most striking and unfortunately irreversible symptoms is exophthalmos. This bulging of the eyes is caused by retroorbital edema, fluid and tissue swelling directly behind the eyes. It is a really powerful visual of a biological system pushed way beyond its limits.
On the flip side, a sluggish thyroid, hypothyroidism, often stems from two main culprits. First, an autoimmune destruction of the gland itself, which is known as Hashimoto's thyroiditis. Second, a simple lack of dietary iodine. Remember that 120 to 150 microgram requirement we talked about? Well, if you don't eat enough iodine, the factory literally does not have the raw earth materials it needs to build hormones. The brain keeps sending TSH, just yelling, "Work harder!" So the thyroid cells multiply and swell up in a desperate attempt to catch any stray iodine floating by. This physical swelling of the neck is exactly what we call a goiter.
So we've toured the factory, the assembly line, the logistics, and seen the dramatic consequences of imbalance. I want to leave you with this provocative thought. Considering how deeply sensitive this master factory is, how might your own daily habits, like your dietary iodine intake, or even acute stress, which we know shifts your hormone conversion away from active T3 and toward inactive products, be subtly influencing your very own metabolic engine right now? It's a pretty fascinating question, and for sure one worth pondering the next time you think about your body's energy. Thanks for hanging out with me for this explainer, and keep feeding your curiosity.